Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Resurrect, and in this video we continue on our E92 M3 rebuild, and what we're doing today is we're stripping down our donor car for usable and sellable parts. Now the process of actually disassembling this car into a unibody, it took about 8 to 10 hours total, but I split that up into about 4 days, just working a couple hours here and there. So when you disassemble a car to the shell or a unibody, it's faster to remove the engine, transmission, subframe, and suspension with the brakes attached as an assembly. So this is the drivetrain assembly, and this assembly is basically the reverse order of how these cars would be assembled from the factory. So we start by removing the wheels and the fender liners so we can access the bumper hardware as well as the fender hardware. Then from underneath the car, we need to remove the side skirts, the underbody panels, and the exhaust from back to front. So that's what we're doing here. Just removing the rear axle back exhaust. Now we remove the catalytic converters in the front exhaust assembly. And now, on to the propeller shaft. Here we go, just removing some underbody panels just so we can access that shaft. And then you have about 6 to 8 bolts on either side of the shaft from the transmission to the rear differential. And then with a pry bar, and it's out. So once the wheels and liners are off, we remove the front bumper cover. And once the front bumper cover is off, we can start disconnecting the plugs and hoses that go to the core support assembly. This assembly is the front bumper reinforcement, the headlights, and the radiators, all attached together as an assembly. So here we are, just disconnecting that and getting that out of the way, removing the radiators because they're kind of loose there. And by removing all these parts as assemblies, we expedite the process of rebuilding our car because we now have these complete assemblies that we can just attach to the frame once we line up the frame properly and repair it. So with the front assembly, exhaust, drive shaft, we're off to working on loosening the engine here and transmission, front subframe and suspension, along with the brakes as an assembly. This is the drivetrain assembly. This is the process, the process of removing this, for the most part, is universal on modern cars, but we need to just loosen the strut top mount bolts, the steering column coupling, the fuel lines, the brake lines, and the electrical connectors that go to the body of the car. Cars are typically built in such a way that you can easily remove the drivetrain assembly in this manner because at the factory the body is joined to the drivetrain in reverse of what we are doing. Once you have disconnected as much as you can, we put a lift table under the drivetrain and remove the 6 subframe bolts. Here we're using a $200 1,000 pound Harbor Freight lift table to slowly lower the drivetrain as an assembly. And as you do so, make sure to lower it very slowly in stages, taking care to look around in the engine bay to see if anything is still attached and if anything needs to be separated. So once you have the drivetrain off of the car, we begin to separate the engine from the transmission. With all the bolts removed, it usually just works its way out pretty easily, but you might need a pry bar and a non-marring hammer to accomplish the task. Then we're going to set up our shop crane to separate the engine from the subframe by removing the motor mount bolts. And you can pick up one of these shop frames at Harbor Freight for anywhere between $150 and $200. And they're great because they fold up just like most other cranes do, which allow you to save space in your shop. So now we have the engine separated from the subframe assembly. We can separate these two by just pulling the crane and cart away from each other. So now with the engine off, we can start working on the brake and suspension parts, as well as the steering rack, which is a great selling part on this car, as well as the front struts and the rotors and the control arms on this car. Pretty much all of these parts are exclusive to an M series car, and they do well on eBay because they're small enough to ship. Now we're going to move on to the rear, and we will lower the differential, axle, suspension, and brakes as an assembly. And typically a tool cart like this is good enough to support the weight of this assembly. However, this Craftsman box that I'm using is a little cheap, and I think I need something more durable next time. I've used this cart one too many times with heavy weight items on it, and the wheels are starting to bend, so it's difficult to roll. So before we lower the assembly, we will need to center on top of the cart this rear assembly and position the car so that it's touching it. And then we have to remove the bolts from either the top or the bottom of the rear struts and disconnect the hydraulic and emergency brake lines and any electrical connectors. And once we've done that, we can go ahead and disconnect the 4 bolts that hold the subframe to the car and slowly raise the car. And so now we're just removing the rear brakes, the rear suspension parts, as well as the differential, which is an excellent selling part. You can get a lot of your money back on a parts car from the differential alone. So we're going to go ahead and remove as much as we can and split everything into as small packages as possible, because when you're selling and you sell on eBay or something like that, you want to be able to ship it in a small package so it doesn't cost a lot. So here we are, just disconnecting those last few parts. Sometimes things won't disconnect or they won't come out, such as I had trouble with one drive shaft here. I couldn't get it out and I ended up damaging it, so there's some casualties here. So the only thing left to do now is to remove the rear bumper, doors, interior. However, for now I'm going to leave the interior inside the cabin so it's out of the elements. The last thing I'll do is sell the doors so I can keep my interior components dry. As always, thank you so much for watching this video. Please comment, like, and hit that subscribe button.